Welcome to episode 114. Thank you for joining us. This week we have another edition of World of Wargaming. William and I were able to spend some time with the founder and CEO of Victura Studios, Peter Tamte. Peter talks to us about his newest project, 6 Days in Fallujah, a first person tactical military shooter that recreates true stories of Marines, soldiers, and Iraqi civilians during operations Vigilant Resolve and Phantom Fury. This game is so nuanced. It's not just your standard first person shooter that is generally placed in a semi historical setting based on a conflict that is far removed from history. He walks us through the highs and lows of developing a video game, the change in the standard lone wolf run and gun style gameplay, and the challenges of making a game that accurately recreates a battle that many people playing it have actually participated in. As you can imagine, there was a lot of criticism when the project was first announced, but interestingly, most of it came from those who never served. Peter treats this project with the passion and sensitivity of someone who wants to do this right and have it be something that is authentic to those who were there. When we talk about wargaming providing the reps and sets that will help future service members in future wars, 6 Days in Fallujah is definitely shooting on target. And now, here's our conversation with Peter Tamte.
Hello, MCA Scuttlebutt listeners. My name is William, and I'm here with Vic.
Hey,
And we have a great episode today with a great guest. Today, we are meeting with Peter Tamte from Victura Games, correct?
Or just Victoria. Yeah, either way.
Victura. And we are here to talk about the up and coming game 6 Days in Fallujah, which is something that's been long anticipated. It's long in the running, it's been long in the making, and we are here to go ahead and spill the beans about all the great details, at least as much Peter is willing to tell us. So, Peter, how are you today?
Great, great. Thanks. Appreciate you having me on the show today.
Awesome. So, do you mind just providing our audience just some background information on yourself, who you are, how you wound up at Victura, and then just some intimate details about how the development of 6 Days in Fallujah started?
Yeah, yeah, you bet. Yeah. So I've been in the video game business for probably 25, 30 years or so. I built early days. I built a business called Macsoft, which became the largest Macintosh software publisher in the world. And then I went to work for Apple, ran senior director of consumer marketing. Steve Jobs hired me shortly after he got back to Apple. Ran consumer marketing until some friends of mine from Bungie Software gave me a ring and said that they were interested in some help. They had this game called Halo coming up, and I knew these guys quite well, and so they asked me to join Bungie as executive vice president. Did that through the acquisition of Bungie by Microsoft. Then I started another business called Destineer. We built that into one of the 25 largest publishers of packaged video games in the world, which of course now is a tiny, tiny segment of the market. At the time, it was 90% of the market. Today, it's probably 10% of the market. But was that, and during that time is actually one of the things that we started doing. We started working with Marine Corps, and one of the good friend of mine had built a business called Atomic Games that was creating training systems for the Marine Corps, and through him, we began working with Marines and eventually acquired Atomic Games and began creating training systems for the Marine Corps, which is what led us to the 6 Days in Fallujah project.
So, do you mind just going into details, like how did that project originate, and how did Victoria eventually come to essentially, I guess, it's the right way to acquire it, but become
Yeah,
producing
yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah. Right. No, it's a long and sordid story. So it started innocently enough. So part of the work that we were doing with the Marine Corps is the Marine Corps would send subject matter experts to us to help us get the systems right. And those subject matter experts, of course, would be Marines who had just been deployed. So these guys are going back and forth during this is through 2003 and 2004. And I got to know a number of these guys really well, became friends with a number of these guys. And one of them, Marine Sergeant Eddie Garcia, was blown up by mortar in Fallujah. Um, uh, just within seconds or minutes of bleeding out. Buddies were able to help stop the bleeding. He was transferred to a hospital on the field, then a hospital in Baghdad, then a hospital in Germany, then a hospital in the United States, and then he called me, and he told me these stories of these things that had happened during this battle, and even though I was very much in touch with military matters, I was embarrassed that I hadn't heard a single one of these stories. And it was Eddie actually at that point who suggested the idea of creating a game to try to recreate some of the experiences from these stories that he and other Marines had experienced during the battle for Fallujah. And right there on the spot, pretty much, I said yes. Here's one of my heroes asking me to tell his story and story of the others he fought alongside. I mean, it's one of the most, I mean, it's the greatest honor of my life. And so we did that, and we began, um, through the work that we were doing with the Marine Corps at the time, and through Eddie and through many others that we got to meet, we began recording just a few weeks after these Marines had returned from Fallujah, recording their stories on video so that we could recreate them for the game. So I was out at Camp Pendleton, I was at Lejeune, we were all over the place doing these, getting these stories. And a couple years into development, Activision releases Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the first one. It sells $1 billion. And even though we had already invested $10 million of our own money into the game, it became clear that we were going to be, budgets just exploded after Call of Duty Modern Warfare. And we're like, we're going to need a partner. So we partnered with Konami, one of the largest video game companies in the world, to fund the second half of the project effectively. Announced the game in 2009. Internet explodes. I mean, we had news organizations around the world just beating down our door to talk to us about this idea of recreating true stories through a video game, a documentary video game. And, quite honestly, a lot of people were upset that we were trying to do that. And Konami, their parent company's board of directors in Japan ordered the U.S. unit to pull out. I had to wind down the whole project. And so over the next, and I got discouraged. I left the video game business actually for a number of years. I was discouraged by what had happened. Built a productivity software company, sold that, and then reinvested the money into creating 6 Days in Fallujah all over again. And so at that point, then now we're at 2017, end of 2017, began 2018. I partnered with some of the guys that I had worked with at Bungie that I knew were instrumental in creating Halo and Destiny. These are the core people on the team at that time, and asked them whether or not they would be interested in creating this game, 6 Days in Fallujah, and they said yes. And so we began that development in very late 2017, a kind of a brand new revisioning of 6 Days in Fallujah, but using a lot of the information that we had started gathering just weeks after the battle ended.
So what was that process of collecting interviews weeks after the battle? And were the Marines you were interviewing, were they knowledgeable that this information was going to the development of video game? And if so, what was their reaction to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We were very, very clear. And I mean, I'd go into a barracks at Pendleton, and Marines would line up, quite frankly, and they weren't so much anxious to tell their story as they were to tell their friend's story. I mean, you think about this. If somebody risked or in some cases lost their life trying to save you, you want the world to know. And so we had many, many Marines um, tell us stories, everything from guys would sketch out a house for us and say, I went here, this guy did this, the insurgent did this, whatever, stepping through the stories, all the way from that kind of nitty gritty detail to we sat down on camera and had many, many Marines on camera telling us their stories fresh from the battle.
That's
Yeah, and
incredible.
all of them
So
knew. To answer your question, yeah, all of them knew this. The whole point of what we're doing was to recreate this through a video game. There was a immediate enthusiasm for that. I mean, the resistance to the game has not really come from Marines. It has come from people who are more hostile to America's military.
yeah,
Oh,
so
that's
go
that.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm
Vic,
sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, that's so interesting because one of my thoughts when you initially mentioned the sort of resistance to doing a documentary video game on events that, I mean, are in the very near, very recent history,
Right.
would be those folks who are clearly, have been coming home in our home now with many, many scars, psychological and physical, from these events. And so that was where my mind initially went. But what you're saying is the folks who are actually there, boots on the ground, they're all about this. And it was more sort of folks who already have a kind of an anti-war agenda that were the ones raising the biggest stink about this.
Yeah, that's absolutely what we experienced. Now, I'm not saying 100%
Mhm.
of the Marines who are in Fallujah support what we're doing, but my experience is the vast majority did and still do. There, as we've reached out to different Marines over the last, almost 20 years now, about this, a lot of them, so we get 70-80% were anxious to participate. 10%, 20% have said, you know what, totally support what you're doing, but I don't want to go there anymore. I've
Yeah,
moved on with my life and I don't want to go back. And so, and we respect that. And then there is a group of people who just don't think it's a good idea to try to recreate these things in a video game.
did they ever
The
give you like a sort of cohesive argument regarding that, or was it more emotional?
um, you know, um, so I think there's definitely a couple points that of concern, that um, that we take to heart, which is, are we going to recreate the death of their friend?
Oh man, yeah,
Right. And so we decided very early on we're not going to do that. And when we need to communicate that, it's going to be communicated in a documentary style. That their friend explaining what happened to the
yeah,
marine to the marine, as opposed to recreating that. And we certainly don't want to do something that, I mean, we can, I mean, technically and creatively, we can recreate humans, right? We've got this concept called
sure,
digital humans now, right? And we can, so the reaction to that ability to be able to do that in a game has been everything from I don't want you to do that to uh, I really desperately want you to recreate this friend of mine because I never got the chance to say goodbye.
oh man,
Yeah, full range. And so we've been trying to deal with that in a real sensitive way. Clearly, never doing something in which somebody who lost their life, that we're doing something with them in the game that their family might be sensitive to.
sure,
Right? And we don't need to tell a lot of these stories. We don't need to. This is very voluntary. But on the other hand, honestly, 80% of the time when I've run into those situations, those people want their stories to be told because the last thing they want is for their son's sacrifice to be forgotten. So,
yeah,
it is really the full range. So I think when you ask, why might somebody, there's the two sides of people who might object to the game, the people who are participants in the battle and the people who are hostile to the people who are in the
hmm,
battle. So, from those who, um, from the side of the people who are in the battle, most of the resistances come from people who don't play video games, and so they don't necessarily what they see is they see their friends or their kids playing Call of Duty, shooting each other up, and just a very artificial representation
right,
of war, right? And so
yeah,
that's the only picture they have in their minds. And once we talk about what we're really doing, then it's like, oh my, that's a completely different approach
yeah,
to than I thought. And we get a lot of support. Typically, we get a lot of support from those people who oppose the game. On the other hand, I mean, when we announced the game in 2009, um, the media immediately went to the anti-war organizations. Keep in mind, we were still in Iraq at this point in
oh, sure,
2009,
yeah, oh,
right?
no, yeah,
Yep. So the media immediately went to the anti-war organizations and asked them for quotes on it. And the quotes were, I mean, these are people who don't think there should be film about.
yeah, because
They don't think
I
Hollywood
guess
should create movies
I
either.
guess from
Yeah.
their perspective, it's glorification
It's
then.
glorification.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly right. Exactly right. And I think it comes from a perspective of not really understanding the mentality of somebody who serves. I've spoken at this point with hundreds of Marines who participated in combat, and I don't know any of them who really want more war, right? It's the war has affected them in a very, very personal way. But at the same time, they understand that sometimes it's necessary. And one of our hopes with what we're doing with 6 days is to educate people who have not been part of combat on why it is that things go in a way that you don't expect. Why it's more complex than you expect. Von Clausewitz talks about this a lot in On War about the friction of combat.
Hmm.
And I remember going back to 2004 after those 4 Blackwater contractors were hung from the bridge
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
provoked an emotional reaction across the world, and especially in the United States. Pax Americana, we cannot let them do that to us. And that kind of it put a lot of pressure on the political leadership to go do something really substantial. But at that very same time, General Mattis and the other leadership inside the military is saying, don't make me take that city, because that is going to create a humanitarian crisis and it's going to create more enemies for us. We know who did this. Let's just go deal with them.
Hmm.
But because the public had this emotional reaction to what had happened, there was a lot of pressure on the political leadership to go in, and that was Fallujah 1, right? So we go in, we get about halfway through the city, and in like 4 days,
Yeah.
right? But exactly what General Mattis said was going to happen happened, which was now all of a sudden you've got all these media people running around taking pictures. Hey, there's a sniper in a minaret. He's killing Marines. Well, you got to do something about that minaret. But what part gets on television? It's not the part that gets on television is not the sniper shooting at the Marines. It's the Marines blowing up the minaret,
Right.
right? And so there's this reaction that, oh my goodness, you got to get out of the city. And so political leadership then tells the military leadership, you were right. You got to get out of the city. We shouldn't have done this. I mean, they didn't say that obviously, but that's what,
Right.
right? So we pull out of the city, and within just 2 months, the person who's in charge of that city is now Abu al-Zarqawi, effectively the godfather of ISIS. So here's the thing. I think most of us understand intellectually war is difficult, but we don't fully appreciate the sacrifice of individuals who are asked on our behalf to be there. And we don't fully understand the complexity that ever since von Clausewitz, the generals have been trying to get the politicians and the public to understand. But what we can do then is the closest thing we can do that is to actually put a video game player in a recreation of that scenario where they have to solve the problem for themselves. And in the process of solving the problem for themselves, become a lot more knowledgeable about the complexity of what war really involves.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I think too, like, interestingly enough, and this was before the digital era, but we would do things, as I'm sure you've heard about, is, sand table exercises. That was sort of
Yeah,
our
Stex.
way.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And so there was a level of sensitivity there, but at the same time, there was this also the urgency that when I get an after action report, for better or for worse, I would be irresponsible as a leader of Marines to not sand table what was actually happening,
bingo.
maybe even days, weeks ago.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
understanding that a lot of those Marines that are standing around that sand table knew the Marines that were involved in this action, for better or for worse.
Yeah, good point.
And but at the same time, I can't sanitize it because we have to chalk talk this thing. We have to put ourselves in their feet so that because I'm in the shoot, man. Like I'm gonna be exactly on the ground that they're standing in, 120 days. And
Yeah,
so if I just ignore this thing, or if I just
right,
play it off, or if I just give a lecture,
right.
it doesn't do them any good. There's no training opportunities, there's no growth, there's no preparation involved. And so I think that nuanced piece is something that, like you've already articulated, like it can't necessarily be understood by anybody who's not wearing the uniform. And I think because I think
Yeah,
about from my personal experience, now granted, if you were to try to make a video game out of things that I've done, it would be the most boring video game ever. It wouldn't make it past beta testing. But at the same time, like the thing that I would want and I would encourage would be if you were to take the things that I experience or those like me have experienced, and so that those who are going forward, and now we're in
Bingo.
this weird pause, right? Like
Yeah.
we went through 20 years of war where
Yeah.
at the cyclical rate,
Yeah.
young Americans were experiencing this thing. And so
Yeah.
almost corporately, we had this culture of understanding. We don't have that anymore.
Right.
And God help us when it does happen again. I mean, we're sort of on pace that every 10 years something goes down, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
what are those guys and gals gonna do? Are
Right.
we just going to throw them into the meat grinder without any or are we gonna take this deep, deep wealth of information and experience and then share that and right? So I mean,
Bingo.
yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I think even in some cases, the problem becomes more complex because I don't know if media collectively really captures the essence of the challenge. I mean, if you think about in video games, the goal of a game like Call of Duty is to make the player a hero, and in order to do that, they have to make compromises on realism.
Yeah, big time for Call of Duty.
Yeah, right, and we kind of look at it a little differently in that we don't think that our job is, and we don't think that what players are asking from us is to be a hero. I mean, yes, they are ultimately, we all wanna be heroes, but I think what the first question is, I'm kinda curious about what it's really like.
Mhm.
And so we are approaching it from that angle instead of the "you're gonna be a hero" angle. We're approaching it from the, "No, we actually have spoken with more than 100 Marines who participated in this battle, and they have told us a lot of information. We've built this simulation around all that insight, built AI to use the tactics that were described to us, built a procedural architecture system so that so that the player experiences the uncertainty. They don't know what's on the other side of that
Yeah.
door. All these different kind of pieces to try to create an experience that the goal is understanding the way it really is, as opposed to just simply being a hero. Yeah,
So
and that I hope will actually provide some insight, not just to players, but also, yes, absolutely, to future warriors.
So you brought up a great point about how a lot of modern game series, especially in the first-person shooter genre, leaning towards historical incidences, are really struggling with authenticity. I mean, there was a glimmer of hope with Battlefield 1, but then they threw it away with the next few of their series. Call of Duty, I mean, they just added Nicki Minaj this week as a playable character. So they're struggling as they historically as they appeal to a more Gen Z audience. What does
Right.
16's Fallujah do differently, both in terms of storytelling and gaming mechanics, that brings that authenticity to your game?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a great question, and there's three specific things I want to talk about that we're doing just fundamentally different approach. So Um, Jamie Griesemer is our game director. Jamie was lead designer on Halo. In fact, at the time we sold Bungie to Microsoft, he was the only designer on Halo, and then he was the only designer on Destiny for the pre-production of that as well. So as you can imagine, this is a guy who's really been instrumental in creating a lot of the things the way we play video games today. First thing he did, he sat down and he watched these interviews that we had captured from Marines, and he read tons of documents that we had from the battle, firsthand accounts of what had happened. And the thing that he noticed from the first thing he noticed was he's like uncertainty. Um, the I touched on this just a second ago, but it is central to understanding the challenge. Uh, Marines never knew what was on the other side of each door. And that was terrifying to them. It affected everything about how they were going to go through that door, to their mindset, their mentality. All of this is affected by the fact that you have no idea what's on the other side of that door. But that, of course, is the opposite of the way video games work because we play the same maps over and over again. So we started investing in a technology we call procedural architecture. The idea is that literally the structure of the buildings themselves change every time you play. The rooms, the layout of the rooms, where the doors are, where the windows are, all these things change every time you play. So you can no longer do what video game players do, which is to memorize the map. you just don't know. So and that changes, because the second you don't know what's on their side of the door, it changes how you're going to enter that door. Of course, Marines, you're taught fatal funnel, right? You know, if there's any insurgents on the other side of that door, they are aiming their fire on that doorway, because the doorway is a fatal funnel.
Yeah, you got to clear the breach.
You got to clear the breach, and you got to clear it quickly, and you got to get control of that room. And if you don't do that successfully, a number of people are not going to survive. So that is so first technology we built is this idea of procedural architecture, so that the structure of the buildings themselves, the layout of the buildings themselves changes every time you play the game. Next thing is that we really learned a lot about teamwork. You can lone wolf your way through Call of Duty, especially in Call. I mean, hey, look, yeah, you're playing on a team, and I don't want to just pick on Call of Duty. You can lone wolf your way through any video game, almost any
Yeah,
video game,
yeah.
right? And a lot of that has to do with the way that the AI systems are developed, or the way the game is developed in the case of a competitive game. And so we've tried to strip away a lot of the niceties. And in our case, we're building a game that is a cooperative multiplayer game, so that we have control over those AI. We can cause the AI to deploy certain kinds of tactics that human players in competitive multiplayer often don't use. So we can force a deeper level of reality into the scenarios. And what we found is that it is very, very difficult to be successful in missions in 6 Days in Fallujah as a solo player. You can try, and in fact, we've had some very capable YouTube and Twitch creators who have tried, and some of them have been successful in creating in completing missions, but they said that takes them typically 30, 40 tries. So it's extremely difficult to complete missions successfully in 6 days as a solo player. You have to work with your team. So therefore, you have to move and communicate with tactical efficiency. So that is just fundamentally different than the way virtually any other military shooter has approached the problem. So now you've got an environment, you don't know what's on the inside, and you've got AI that's programmed in a certain way. We call it block scale AI, programmed in a specific way to ensure that you cannot be successful as a solo player. It's very difficult to be successful as a solo player.
So Peter, really quick
Yeah,
on that
yeah,
note,
yeah. Mhm.
what sort of, I guess, consequence, or because it seems like what you're striving for is almost a culture shift within gaming itself,
Yeah,
outside of, you know, like from the military standpoint, and those who are listening, who are in uniform or have worn the uniform, understand the wargaming structure and those sorts of things.
yeah,
But we're talking about a very
yeah,
small population. For the
yeah.
vast majority of gamers, my sons included,
Mhm.
we are all about running and gunning, man. Like it's just about leveling up and getting your
Yeah,
badges, and meeting
yeah,
certain criteria, right? And so, and finding special upgrades.
yeah,
So what you're talking about seems like a massive a paradigm shift within the gaming
yeah,
experience itself.
yeah.
What I guess, what if some of your thoughts moving forward on some of that stuff? Like, do you feel like this is going to be embraced, or have you prepared yourself to absorb some, criticisms on the gameplay itself?
Yeah, well, we're getting it right now.
Okay.
Our return rate's higher than it should be, because a lot of players go into the game trying to play solo, realize they can't play solo, and then they pull back out. And so, to be clear, we're going to also release, hopefully later this year, but not too long from now in any event, the ability to play solo where you control AI Marines teammates. So you still have to deploy tactics effectively. Um, and so therefore we still maintain that level of realism. In the meantime, however, yeah, we've absolutely gotten a lot of flack from players who don't want to do that. But we've also gotten the exact opposite effect, which is a whole lot of people, and quite frankly, a lot of them are veterans, have
Mm.
embraced what we're doing to say, this
Sure.
is the first time somebody's actually made a realistic video game. Thank you for doing this. Please, please, please don't let up. And in fact, we're gonna dig deeper into that level
Yeah.
of realism with some of our future content updates. So it works both ways. Some people really love what we're doing. Some people don't. What I don't necessarily expect, though, I don't necessarily expect that to be adopted in a broad sort of way.
Mhm.
Again, I think fundamentally, a lot of video games believe that their job is to make the player the hero, and they're going to keep doing things that make players feel like a hero, as opposed to trying to be as realistic as possible.
Yeah, I know from my experience in gaming, most of the titles that you've mentioned, I've really enjoyed playing, but I always did feel like, "But I'm doing this on my own. That's not
Right.
realistic."
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear I'm really happy to hear that there is an upswell of folks who sort of
There
resonate with that
are.
sentiment, yeah.
There are, and we play test this. We bring in regular video game players to play test as we're in development, just to try to get a feel for, is it too hard, is it too easy, blah blah, blah, and are they understanding the controls, all that stuff. Really interesting results. And we did this like a dozen times. We take 4 players, they're good at Call of Duty or they're good at Battlefield or whatever. Come on in, they play the game. We watch them. First time, all 4 players run in 4 different directions at the beginning. Second time, they stick a little bit closer together. By the third or fourth time, somebody in the group will go, "If we don't stick together, we are not going
We're
to
done.
survive." And then from that point forward, they actually start talking. Now they don't have the proficiency that somebody who's really been trained in the tactics has, but they gradually inch their way towards that. And their play times each time, first time 30 seconds, second time a minute, and eventually they're getting up that 7, 8, 9 minutes before the team gets wiped out. So it's definitely. And then we ask them the question afterwards: Is it too hard or not? And they're all like, "Yes, it's too hard. Please don't change that." So,
Nice.
yeah. So I think there are players who, I really do believe there are a lot of players who are really curious what it's really like to be in combat, and they know they're not getting that from most of the mainstream video games, and so therefore we're doubling down on that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you've given us some feedback in terms of how gamers have viewed it. To what extent have you gotten feedback from your most recent development from Marines and especially also ones who've been in Fallujah as well?
Very favorable. With Very favorable, and of course, we actually had a bunch of guys who've helped us with the game. A number of them we had play the game before we released it. We released it into early access so far, so we've released about 10% of the game so far. It's available on Steam to play, and still 90% to go. But we've got that 10% out, and we had a number of guys who had helped us. I shouldn't say numbers. A few of those guys had helped us play the game. In addition to that, then of course, since the game has been released into early access, we've had, I mean, tens of thousands of veterans play the game. Um, I don't even, it's tens of thousands. I don't even know how many. And they're posting really nice things about the game, recruiting their friends to play the game with them as well. And then, of course, you've got YouTube and Twitch creators who are veterans, and they're publicly talking about the game and saying just really wonderful, heartwarming things to us. I mean, in many ways, we've been creating this game as much for those veterans as for a broader player group. And so, obviously, you like it when anybody tells you, "Thanks, I really appreciate this game, given me a new insight into something, or it's changed this or that about my life." But when that person is somebody who served, then they tell you this is the most realistic representation of what I experienced. I mean, our whole development team,
Mhm.
that whole day, we're twice as productive as we were the day before, because that just means so much to us. It
That's
really does.
that's the juice, yeah.
It's the juice. It's the juice, and it's the juice that kept me alive on this project. Quite frankly, when we were getting attacked by media so vociferously. Even after we had to wind things down back in 2009, I would get emails. I got emails for years after that, just out of the blue. "I'm a Marine, I served in Fallujah," or "I'm a soldier, I served in Fallujah, and I really want you to tell our story. Please don't let this thing die." And then when we announced what we're doing, re-announced the game in 2021, uh, I mean, we were really attacked by the games media. I mean, they just I mean, they really came after us hard. And every time, it seemed like every time I would read one of these articles from somebody who clearly just hates the American military. Um, I would get an email that same day out of the blue from somebody I didn't know who was a veteran who would then describe, they don't just say this game's important to me, they describe why this game is so important to them. And and I'd spread that with the team because the team could get discouraged. And then they'd get this email from a veteran saying, this is why what you're doing is so important to us. Please go, please keep going. And it was the electricity that fed us through a lot of discouraging moments.
Interesting. So, having watched some of the gameplay and played some of the early access myself, one thing that intrigues me is that something that a lot of, especially first-person shooters, don't handle is the fact that in the battle space there's a lot of civilians. How does 6 Days in Fallujah handle that, and what factors went into decisions of whether to include civilians in the way you did?
Yeah, so we're going to be doing a lot more with civilians in future releases, even in early access. It's a technical problem to solve. And when we think about the AI systems that we need to develop, our first system that we built was the Insurgent AI system, so that at least we could let human players play the game by teaming up with each other. The second step is then to build the Marine AI, the friendly AI, and you also play Army soldiers as well. So I shouldn't just call it Marine AI, but friendly AI. And that we're in very late stages of right now to finishing that. And then the final piece there will be the civilian piece as well. And as you mentioned, it was a big complicating factor. So in a lot of games right now, civilians are just scripted. So that's what we've been doing so far. So it's very limited. But we're going to really make those civilians feel human. There's a lot of technology that goes into that, and I heard a lot of empathy expressed from Marines who were in Fallujah about the civilians who were left in the city. Keep in mind, because of what had happened in the first battle for Fallujah, before the second battle, the Iraqi government and the Western coalition I mean, aggressive effort to get civilians out of the city. Everybody was told it's coming, and we've spoken with a ton of civilians who were in the city at the time, and they all said, "Yep, everybody knew that this was going to happen, and they all knew that we had this window of time to get out of the city." 90% or so of the civilians did leave the city, but the 10% that was left, they were there because in some cases they had health issues that didn't allow them to get out. In some cases, they didn't know where they would go if they left the city. Didn't necessarily have family they could stay with. And in some cases, they worked for an employer who said, "I need you to stay and protect the home or the business." So there were some legitimate reasons why civilians were still in that city, and that was very, very dangerous for them. And Marines, as they're clearing the city at that point, the job is to get everybody out of the city, so that, I mean, literally every human being out of the city, cordon off the city, and then only let people back in who have an identification that they can prove that they're a resident of the city. That was the whole purpose of the operation, right? So as they're clearing, they're encountering, I had a Marine talk about encountering a man who was on dialysis. You know, I mean, that operation stopped, right? There's an innocent guy here, and our job is now changed from clearing this home to getting this guy to safety. And on the other hand, you also have insurgents who had stashed weapons all over the city, and they would and tunnels. And so when they were getting cornered inside of a house, drop their weapon, escape from a rooftop or escape through a tunnel, and they just walk out in the street. Now they're not armed. They look just like any other civilian. So what do you do? That individual may have just killed your best friend. What do you do? You can no longer do anything because you can't prove that you can't. He's unarmed. So how do you deal with these situations? Civilians are that was a factor for Marines as they're clearing the city. This fear of What did they do when they encounter civilians? I had some Marines say they never encountered a civilian the entire time. And I had others that say that they encountered 100 of them. Right.
So
So
interestingly enough on that, so from my experience, my sort of counter to that friction, which was omnipresent,
yeah,
was we always had the Iraqi
yeah,
army or whomever with us, and they could
yes,
sort of vet
yes.
these things for us. Is that a aspect of the game that you guys are going to be incorporating?
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely, and I think that's a story we really wanna tell.
for sure. That's an
Eh,
amazing story, actually.
it is, it is. I'll tell you honestly what makes it hard to tell that story. Many of the Iraqis, most of the Iraqis who participated at that time, between that time and now, are no longer alive.
Yeah, because of ISIS. Yeah, no,
Correct.
I
That's
get
right.
so many stories of my buddies who are no longer with us now because of
Iraqi
that.
buddies.
Yeah, mhm.
Yeah, yeah, and, again, this is counterintuitive to people who haven't spent as much time with those who served. But, but I mean, and it's really blows your mind when you think about it because many of those Iraqis who were fighting alongside the Marines in 2004, a year before that, were on the other side of the
Oh, yeah.
battlefield shooting at the Marines,
Mhm.
right? Because they were part of the Iraqi military. And something that had changed between those two times, those two moments in time, is the relationship that America had with the Iraqi military. And so now you're alone in the house dependent on this guy's dark house. You're dependent on an Iraqi in many cases. And I have story of Marine after Marine that talks about an Iraqi saving his life. I mean, I mean, it's just something. It's just something that we want people to understand is that, and actually, it's Eddie Garcia said it the best. I think he said, we lost thousands, they lost hundreds of thousands, and what were they fighting? They're fighting terrorism. They're fighting a common enemy. And I would love for more Americans, more Europeans to understand that sacrifice that Iraqis have made as well.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
So
so that's absolutely a big part of what we're doing. It's absolutely,
cool.
it's a big part of it because the Marines who we talked to from day one asked us to make it a big part of it.
Nice.
Yeah.
so to what extent have Iraqis been involved in 6 Days in Fallujah, and what has their
Mhm.
reaction been from the ones that you've worked with?
So we've got so far we've interviewed about 26, I think the exact number is 26 or 27, something like that, Iraqis who were involved. And that ranges from civilians to interpreters to a deputy prime minister of Iraq. And
Wow.
yeah, and the um, yeah, so that's a more complicated answer in terms of what's their reaction. That's a more complicated answer. It require because the perception is that we're going to make Iraqis the enemy.
Mhm.
And once we step through that a little bit, many of them understand. Now, the other side of that is many of the people we've worked with, Iraqis we've worked with, were interpreters or fought with the Iraqis fighting for Iraqi forces, and those individuals did not need any explaining. They need no
Right.
explanation. They're right there, right there. And I mean, and their stories are incredible. I mean, the risks to their family, the sacrifices, the friends that they lost. Yeah, it's right there. And the other thing I don't think people fully understand too is so in the second battle for Fallujah was, I think it was probably one of the first times that Iraqi forces were embedded with American troops in active in combat and intentionally. So those Iraqis, many of them wore face masks because not just them, but their families will be hunted. If their identities are discovered, I mean, this is a time when there was a lot of instability throughout the country. And it was very easy for, yeah, he's not a part of my tribe, but I know who he is. That's my neighbor. or I know that guy, I've seen him, and whatever it is. So a lot of those guys had to wear masks. That's the risk that they were taking because they had to still live, and their families lived within, an hour or two of where that battle was taking place. Wow. I mean, it's
Yeah, I can't tell you
hard
how
to,
many times I had to release an interpreter because word got out that
yeah,
he was with us, and now he had to jam back to his
yeah,
hometown to evac his family.
yeah, right.
That was a fairly regular occurrence.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah,
it is definitely an aspect of culture that we don't really appreciate here. Everything we do is very individualized and things, and you don't really kind of get this idea that, like, just like you said, Peter, like, yeah, they may not know him directly, but they'll know someone who does know him, and they
yeah,
have this very crazy recognition. And like, you want to talk about like going viral when a linguist gets identified, it
yeah,
would. I mean, everybody knew almost instantaneously.
yeah,
So there was so many times where,
yeah,
like, hey, actually, Eagle, we've got a convoy going back to that location, just jump on there and then you'll at least get some security with you so you're not just like in some bongo truck like jamming back to Baghdad.
yeah, right, right,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was crazy.
It was yeah, yeah, yeah. It's still somebody who's sitting here in the United States, even decades later. It's still hard to contemplate the risks that some of these guys took, and they told us why they took the risks. They many of them were really wanted Saddam gone for sure, and others. I've had Iraqis that flat out said we wanted the American dream in Iraq. That's
Well,
what we
sure, and
were there
then,
for.
I mean, the whole, like, basis of Sahawa, the awakening was, "Hey, we're
Yeah.
tired of these foreign Al
Yeah.
Qaeda guys coming in and
Yes.
killing Iraqis, like, you guys
Yeah.
are no better than the Americans, at least the Americans are giving us opportunity, you're just killing us."
Yes. Right. Exactly. 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 Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Peter. As you wrap down this interview, do you mind just telling us, so for people who have not downloaded the early access, what content is available now, and then what content can they expect to have by the time the game is completed?
Yeah. Great question. Thank you. Yeah. So the game's available on Steam right now, on PC, on Steam, and that's the best place to download it. And as I mentioned, about 10% of the game's out right now. Yeah. What we've got right now is 4 cooperative multiplayer missions. And we're going to be releasing some more content in a few weeks that's going to create more variety within that. We're also then just continually each quarter going to be doing 2 things. First, we're going to be adding more missions, so there'll be a broader array of things you can play. And then we'll be adding significant features to the game that aren't there right now. So I mentioned one of them earlier, which is that you'll be able to play single player with control over 3 AI teammates, so fire team of 4. That's a big, big feature that uh, we're approaching again differently than the way a lot of tactical shooters have approached that in the past. And then the next big piece that we'll be releasing after that will be bits of our story campaign, which are the pure documentary. Like, you're going to see an interview of somebody who was in the mission. They're going to talk about the mission. Then you're going to be responsible for completing that mission yourself. And so very human stories, what happened, and then your responsibility to try to solve those missions the way you want to solve them. Um, and we also have an operator mode that we'll be introducing, which is where you'll play as special operations units who are conducting slightly different missions than what the conventional forces were doing in the city. So, and using a little bit different gear as well.
Well, and out of curiosity, do you have any plans to release any of the interview footage that you have, or any of the interviews conducted in the making of this game at any point?
It's a great question. I think we'll do some of it. I think we'll do some of it. So the reality is we can only use 3 or 4% of what we've actually recorded in the game. There's just, I mean, we hundreds of hours of it. And so, yeah, I think we are going to do some of that. There's a little debate going on right now about whether we should be doing that between now and when we release, we have to just really careful not to blow some of the stories that are going to get told in the actual game. So some of it will actually, I'm sure we'll release more and more of that between now. We've done a little bit of that in our trailers, by the way. So we've got a couple of trailers and we'll do a little bit more of that as well. So yeah, there'll be some of that that'll be outside the game, but the bulk of it will definitely be a part of the experience. Keep in mind the reason for this is, the premise that we had going into this game is that by trying to do some of these things yourself, you're going to learn something that you can't get just by watching somebody else tell the story. So it really, for us the way we believe players are going to best understand what had happened, to the extent somebody who wasn't there can ever understand what happened, is by these interviews and documentary pieces, and then attempting to do it yourself instead of watching an interview. So,
All right. Well, Peter, thank you for coming on our show. We really appreciate it. To all of our listeners out there, go ahead and get the pre-access for 6 Days in Fallujah. Play it, and if you have any any thoughts or feelings, please relay it to us. We'd love to discuss this further. And Peter, hopefully we'll have you back on the show once the game's 100% out there.
you bet. I'd love to do that. Thank you for having me
And
here.
Peter, please send those links to those trailers for us. We can put those in the show
Oh, great.
description
Yeah, I'll do
too.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
send those over to us. I'd love to be able to get that out. But this was
I'd
awesome,
love
Peter.
to.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, you bet. You bet. Great meeting both of you guys. Thank you.
All right, well, listeners, thank you again, and stay safe, and get some game time in. Take a breather. You don't need to read the Gazette every day. You can take an hour a day
Yeah.
maybe, and get some 6 Days in Fallujah in. But
Yeah.
all right, take it
Learn
easy,
you
y'all.
something. Learn you something.
All righty. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter.
You bet.
Did you know that you can support the professional development of Marines serving today with a tax-deductible contribution? Marines benefit from the professional education resources we provide, and they also receive awards from the Marine Corps Association like the Chesty Puller Award, given to every honor graduate at Marine Corps recruit depots. Make your charitable contribution while there's still time for it to be deducted from your 2023 taxes. Thank you for your support, and Semper Fidelis.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. I am William Truding, but you've also heard the voices or contributions of Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Lichman, or Ty Frazier. The opinions expressed in this episode do not reflect the official stance of the Marine Corps, DoD, or Marine Corps Association.